My name is David Boye, and I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska, which is pretty much smack dab in the middle of the continental United States. We are often sort of condescendingly referred to as flyover country because people that go from coast to coast fly over Nebraska, but we don't have a huge population. I live in Lincoln, which is the capital city, there's 2 or 3 really metropolitan areas in Nebraska, and the rest of it is all rural and farmland and ranch land and dairy production. We're very much an agricultural state. So that's where I'm at. Lincoln's about maybe close to 275,000, I believe. So it's not a small city, but it's really not a large city either. For me, it's just right. I grew up here. I haven't lived here constantly, but I'm back here and living now here. And most of my life I've been here. So that's where I am. As far as what I play and how I began playing it, it's predominantly right now the music I play is acoustic music. Instrumental acoustic music is what I compose and perform and play. And when I say that, I mean in my genre of writing. I actually am a professional musician, play 2 or 3 times a week in a whole mix of kinds of music. Country music, rock music, jazz bands. I play pretty much wherever I can, because in Nebraska, and if you want to be a full-time professional musician, you have to kind of do what is asked. And in Nebraska, country music is very popular. Classic rock and roll, all the things I can get my hands on, I'll do. But as far as my composing and my main kind of creative outlet, it's instrumental music on acoustic guitars. Now, I would have to say that began when I was growing up as a little boy. My older brothers were very much into 1960s folk music. Bob Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel and Peter, Paul, and Mary was another group that I remember hearing. And even though I wasn't really playing music then, that's kind of what I first connected to. So that acoustic guitar is what I started playing when I first began, and went through a phase of about 30 years of playing electric guitar and electric bass, which I still do, like I say, on the weekends and in clubs, on house gigs and things like that. But my acoustic guitar was always the thing that I really connected to, because it was the first thing I played. It's the kind of music I always listened to the most. So that's kind of where it came full circle about 12 or 13 years ago, where I began playing acoustic guitar music, writing acoustic music, and that's kind of, like I say, what I do predominantly now. The acoustic guitar, for whatever reason, connected to me. I don't know if there's a specific reason. It's obviously easy to play because you're on your own, you're playing solo music. You don't have to have a lot of gear, you don't have to set up equipment, you don't have to book tours. You have to book tours, but it's a lot more logistically easy to do. So that's kind of where I began playing acoustic. And like I say, I heard it. I didn't really listen to music in the 60s. I became of age in the 1970s and connected to music then. But I always had that acoustic sound in my head. It's a cliched answer, but it's a huge list, a gambit of lots of music. Now, country music, I have to admit, isn't one of my top 3 favorite types of music, especially modern country. I don't really listen to it much. Classic country. Lincoln in Nebraska does have a big kind of a connection to country music. Country music is sort of, in my local region, very popular, but I was never a big fan of country music. I don't dislike it, but in terms of country music, modern country music, I don't listen to. Some classic country. But as I was saying, my main source of inspiration originally was the acoustic artists of the 1960s and 70s to some degree. People like Cat Stevens, I suppose, and Jim Croce, things like that. But my artists in general that have influenced me is a huge spectrum. Like these guys on the wall behind me here would have to be probably number one, and still are. It's fascinating to find the people that are still, and when I say still, I mean young people that get into the Beatles. But the Beatles were my first real love. Again, I was pretty young, but I started hearing them a lot from my older brothers. The other artist probably I'd have to name in the top three would be Bob Dylan. And so he still is, you know, a connection I can go to whenever I need to hear, to be inspired, to be uplifted, you know, all those things. And as far as general music, other than that, you know, I was a little bit into jazz. I was a saxophone major at the University of Nebraska for 2 years, and then it turned into a minor. But I played saxophone for a long time, and I still do. So jazz was another big inspiration of mine. And then when I actually started playing professional music and thought, I'm going to do this for a lifetime, I was into, oddly enough, punk rock, which is a 1970s movement of music in England and in the United States, and toured around the country for about 15 years with punk rock bands. A lot of genre covered. That's a name that sounds very narrow focused, but it covered a lot of genres. And I never played in any famous bands, but we played all over the country. And so those were probably the three artists would be Bob Dylan, the Beatles, and maybe an odd group that nobody knows about called Television from New York City. So that's kind of a broad spectrum of beginnings. The acoustic guitar artists that I always liked were things like people like Leo Kottke and a guy named John Fahey. Probably those are my two biggest inspirations for what I do now, musically speaking. It's kind of the thing to do. Put some of your collection in the TV. I teach from this location often. Well, for the last 2 years, it was my main source. Luckily now I'm back in person with my home. I have 2 studios in my hometown here that I teach in person to. But this is my video virtual lesson studio. So yeah, those are some of my favorites. Actually, there's a 5th one back here hiding. So, but these are the acoustics that I play most commonly. It's a bit of a disease collecting guitars, because you get one and then you got to get another one and then you got to get another one, and you kind of get too many. I was up to about 35 a few years ago, and I thought I'm never going to have 70 arms to play them at the same time. So I started selling off some of my collection. But yeah, these are probably some of my main instruments I use. I have a lot of beginners and all ages. I teach all ages, but I think the hardest thing for people now that are learning guitar is to have the patience to do it. And I mean, that includes the time to do it, because it's a repetitive thing. Practicing and learning an instrument is all about muscle memory. And I try to tell a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old that comes in to start guitar, I said, it's like your soccer team that you play after school. You guys have 1 or 2 games every year, or every week rather, but you're also practicing 2 or 3 times a week. And you have to do that on the guitar. You're not going to win any games if you don't practice soccer, and you're not going to be able to achieve things on the guitar. So I guess the first thing is to have the time to do it and the patience to do it, because people will see on YouTube, wizards, maybe their own age, playing guitar, and it's like, wow, it's just not that way. So that's the first thing, and the first 2 things I recommend. As far as times, the thing I tell everybody, it's not how long you practice, it's how frequently you practice. So I try to get them to do two times a day for 10, even if it's 10 minutes. It's going to do you a lot better than going once a week for 3 hours. Your fingers will get sore, you'll get frustrated, you just won't get better. But if you do it every day, you'll notice small and consistent, improvement. and I don't know if that's related to COVID and being doing virtual lessons. I don't really think it is, because I think I noticed that probably before then. I come back to patience there, though. I don't know if it's attention span. You know, the thing to blame first and foremost would be video games. And I don't blame it because, you know, I played enough in my lifetime. But I do think people are riveted to something like that on a constant basis. And when it comes time to just having physical and mental focus on something that is not a screen can be different for them. I'm not going to say harder, it's just different. They're not used to it. So the attention span issue is probably related to that to some degree. But, you know, I hate to generalize too, because I have some students now. I have a guitar kid that's 6th grade, I think. Just, you know, he's so much better than I ever thought I could be at 6th grade. I was trying to play 3 chords when I was in 6th grade, and he's just amazing. And he plays the guitar all the time. So, and I'll play something for him and he'll do it 10 seconds later. I don't have to explain it, you know. And so there's all kinds of, the spectrum is wide as far as kids learning, and adults the same way. The spectrum is wide. But yeah, the attention span and the patience level and the time, of course, nobody has time anymore. So to devote, like I say, a consistent practice, a consistent time to your playing, to practicing, to learning it's just not easy for anybody. Most of my performing in terms of my original acoustic music began in 2008 when I was selected. I applied for and was selected for an artist in residence for the National Park Service. And the United States has a program, and its individual parks can participate or choose not to participate. So it's not in every park. But the National Park Service has a program that's called the Artist in Residency Program, where they give you a place to stay, usually 2 weeks, 3 weeks, can be longer, I think. And always in the most beautiful of locations. They tell you, go play music. So that's not performing per se, but that's where I can do my composing. And that's where I've done most of my composing, is in parks around the country. And now what I do is I go out every summer, and I haven't for the last 2 summers much, but starting about 6 years ago, I set up tours where I do perform the music that I've been writing. And I set up performances within the National Park Service, national monuments, national parks, national recreation areas, some state parks in California. I've set up some things, and it can be in their visitor centers, it can be in their outdoor amphitheaters. We work up a good date, and I come in and I perform the music that I've actually written as an artist in residence. Previously, I have written these and recorded them. And so when I perform to those people, I usually try to connect by narrating what I'm doing in the context of where I'm at, which is, it's really, I don't want to say it's easy to do, but when you're sitting, as I did last summer in Arches National Park, and behind the amphitheater there's an arch. I can't remember which one it's there, but you know, I don't have to do much to get people in the mood to hear music created through nature, inspired by nature, I should say. So I can connect to them by talking, narrating, giving history of both what I'm doing and also history of the place they're in, try to create an atmosphere, and the music hopefully carries that through as I perform it. In terms of other situations, every performance I do here regionally and locally in my home state can be different. If it's a rock band playing for a wedding reception, it's not anything intimate or inspired by nature. So I decided many years ago that if I want to make a living playing music, I'm going to have to be very versatile on what I do. So that's why behind me is a bass guitar. I play bass in a lot of the music I do. acoustic guitars, electric guitars. They're all for different situations. But in terms of connecting to audiences in my original music performances, like I say, the setting helps a lot to set up the atmosphere and connect to those people. It has all the music that I have on my website, and also I put out on streaming platforms and so forth, has been composed in the national parks. And it's hard to go, say, to Rocky Mountain National Park and sit for 2 weeks in the location they put you, which is called the William Allen White Cabin, and look out on the most amazing vistas every morning when you get up and look out, sit on your front porch, which is what I did for 2 weeks. It's hard to go to those places and not feel taken over by the grandness, the immensity, and the unbelievable beauty of these places. And so I try to recreate that to some varying degrees of success, which is the creative process that isn't always, a straight line going up. But I try to capture that and do it within an acoustic guitar, which is, another bit of a challenge, because you don't have a 60-piece orchestra to perform a grand piece of music, which is grand in itself, 60 people playing music together. A single instrument has to create a more grandiose sound in some more maybe creative ways, since it is just one instrument. But I do try that, and like I say, to varying degrees of success, it happens. Yes, the music that I put out has what we call found sounds. I found the sounds. All that audio, the water, the air, birds, whatever I can hear while I'm in the residencies, and I haven't just composed during the artist in residency programs. I've done it in my own region as well, but I have to be in a place of nature, a place outside of town, outside of away from people. But anyway, I do use sounds that I discover where I'm at. So I try to get as many things as I can. Obviously, it has to be something that you can hear, but even the silence can be very evocative. I did a trilogy of a morning, afternoon, and evening piece, 3 parts of one song. In the morning, I could get the birds just barely. I could get them waking up essentially, so they were very sparse. Things like that. I try to capture a moment in time and a moment in a certain space. In Rocky Mountain National Park, there's this beautiful morn of the elk, especially in the August and September months, where they're rutting and they're coming down from the high altitudes, and their cry is really, it's just mesmerizing. And you know, I never really can get a good enough recording of that because they don't get close to you. But things like that, I just find the sounds I can. When I was in Rocky Mountain National Park, it was over Labor Day weekend, which was a very popular tourist, time to come and visit. And I got the idea to record cars driving in through the Rangers entrance station, because that's part of the sounds of the national parks in the United States too. Many of them are overcrowded and worried about, issues with people and cars coming and ruining the environment. So anyway, yeah, I do try to find sounds from the actual places I'm at and incorporate them into the song where it's appropriate and works. I've just learned to deal with it. It's interesting because I don't mind it. I expect it. For example, if it was a coffee house, that music is not necessarily their primary reason for being there, I don't expect them to listen. I mean, I hope they listen, and many will. It can be sometimes harder. Oddly enough, it's harder when they're not listening when I'm playing in, say, a trio or louder rock or blues or jazz group, where it's not intended to be background music, it's intended to be loud. I've had places I play where they're watching, football games on TV right next to where I'm playing, and they don't even look at the band. Now that, to me, is a little difficult to understand. It's like you can't hear anything other than the music. But I guess it's all in what your expectations are, and not to get too frustrated by that. It can be difficult, but like I said, I many years ago decided I'm going to just play as much as I can. I won't play music that I don't like or don't respect or don't necessarily connect to with the players or with the actual music. But if I'm playing music that I enjoy or can accept, I understand the way that is. People, restaurants, bars, coffee houses, people are there for other reasons, and I'm just grateful that a restaurant owner or a coffee house owner wants to pay me money to come and play. In the natural environment, trying to recreate where I'm at or what I'm hearing or what I'm feeling can be that way. It's not necessarily a sadness that encompasses you in the middle of a beautiful vistas, say, of mountain range. But it can be wistfulness. It can be also influenced by reality. For example, worries about the environment, worries about climate changes. If you you know, if you have thoughts about that, or if you realize that this environment you're in is not necessarily permanent, even though it's been there hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, it can be a problem. That's the point of when I recorded the cars coming in and out of the Rangers entrance station. I thought of that as part of the reason. And it's partially my mood too. So while I'm influenced by the natural environment that I'm in, I'm also influenced by the way I'm feeling about my life situation, about, you know, whatever happens to be going on.
You mentioned.
Well, that is true. I've actually, 2 or 3 years ago, I did a short tour. Actually, it was in 2020 during COVID. I was still able to go do a few shows in Colorado, and there was a raging fire just north of Rocky Mountain National Park, and I was in actually Estes Park performing, and there was actually ashes on the table, and the smoke was, I mean, in everywhere you went. I mean, it was, you were still able to be outside, but there was smoke in the air, and it was a very bad, one of the worst in the history of Colorado. And in Nebraska, there isn't fires, but there's dramatic temperature changes. But I'm gonna say I don't understand it. I don't know I've heard the arguments both directions of what has been happening and why. So I just, I play music. It's totally unrelated to the science of climate change. How it influences music, not particularly mine specifically. Maybe, like I was saying, maybe that's the entering into my subconscious while I write maybe a sadder sounding piece of music. But it's definitely in my own thought process. So maybe it comes out through that somehow. Well, that's probably one of the main types of music that I grew up playing and still do. In my acoustic music, though, it's not totally there. I do it often with bands. What I like about it, I think, is just the tradition that has come down of players. In my hometown of Lincoln is one of, and I'm not exaggerating, it's one of the most internationally renowned blues clubs. And when I say internationally, I mean all across the world. And performers have been playing in this small little bar in Lincoln for almost 50 years. They've had live music. And, I play there regularly. I play there almost weekly. And that part was part of my upbringing too, going to this place. It's called the Zoo Bar. And when your hometown has a place where you can hear this music and also perform it when you have the chance, you connect to it. But like I say, that's more in my band situations. I think the tradition, like I say, and just having heard it in so many great players of the genre over the years is what I still connect to there with blues music. Not very often. Actually, the most recent time was in January, just a month ago. I was in Jamaica, and on the invitation of a friend of mine who has a villa there. So they said, "Do you want to come to Jamaica in the middle of January?" I said, "Okay." And but I went and visited them and played with a reggae band down there. Kind of a strange little arrangement, but it worked out really well. But I don't travel outside the country much, and I'll say the word yet, because I would like to do that, especially up into Canada. But I haven't performed outside the United States very often, no. Well, I'm trying to finish up some new music. I'm also trying to edit some music that I've done. When I go to a national park, for example, which is where I've done most of my composing, I basically will take an audio recorder, either a phone or a small digital recorder, and I'll go and sit on a rock and just start playing the guitar. And it's sort of a stream of consciousness playing. And so I don't sit there for 4 days working on one song. I'll play in 4 days' time, maybe 2 hours a day, record 2 hours a day over 4 days. So I have to come back and listen to 8 hours of music. And even though I haven't done a residency for a few years, I still have parts of songs parts of snippets of that playing that I want to turn into songs. And that to me is the time-consuming process. So I can be inspired and I can play and come up with some things I really enjoy while I'm in the environment of the national parks or state parks or just in my local city parks. But to make it a song, a cohesive piece of music that has a start, a beginning, and an end and flows, it's more like patchwork. And so I have hours of audio that I have to edit, find snippets, the things that I'm working on. Many times I'll work on the same thing over these hours, but I have to find the things that I like out of those snippets and then patch them together into a song. Not so much the recording into a song, but play it so that it's a consistent piece. So that's kind of what I'm working on. It's more of older pieces from a previous residency, actually, is what I'm trying to do. So what I like to do when I go to a park, so when people learn guitar, the first thing you learn are about a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, what we call open chords. And I'm telling you, you could play about 90% of popular blues music, popular music, rock music, country music from the last 60 years with those 15 or 20 chords. But in a way that's limiting, because if you're going to compose with that, especially if you're an instrumentalist, you're in real trouble. I have written songs with lyrics, but that's not what I'm doing now. So what I do is what they call alternate tunings. Now, the great singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell, who's one of my favorites, in her career she's used, I think I just recently read, 51 different alternate tunings. So what that means is, when you play a guitar, the notes are what they call standard tuning notes, are specific notes. E, A, D, G, B, E, for those taking notes. But if I play a fingering for a certain chord, it's got to have an arrangement of notes. Well, because of the physical nature of the guitar, you can only reach to certain places. So that's why these common chords, these common open chords, are so popular and so widely used, because with a little practice you can get them down and create songs, you know. That's the first 3 chords to Knocking on Heaven's Door by Bob Dylan. That's all it is. Anyway, that's, like I say, that's a bit limiting when you're trying to compose without lyrics. In fact, it's almost impossible to compose a new song without lyrics in standard tuning. At least I think it is. So what we do is called alternate tunings. Like I was saying, Joni Mitchell does this on many of her pieces. Many great artists do this. When I go to a national park, I will try to create a new alternate tuning. When I say new, it's not new to the world, but it's new to me. It's one that I've never tried before. What that means is, you take the notes that are on the guitar and change them. So instead of E, A, D, I might go to this note, which is another E. Or I might take this note and go up, which I do sometimes, to A. I'm going to redo this one. Alright, so what I've done is played. Now I have the notes E, A, E, and out of tune A, B, and E. Okay, that means very little except to the music theorist. But what it means to me as a composer is now all of a sudden I finger a chord the way that is traditionally done. It does not sound at all like it used to sound. So it's all brand new for me. It's all experimentation. It's all inspiration, because now I can respond to the sound I'm hearing and not to just my muscle memory. It's a funny thing. When you first learn guitar, you got to learn muscle memory. But then when you get to an intermediate level on guitar, you got to undo the muscle memory. You got to do things that you haven't done before to get the sounds you want. And so when we hear these alternate tuning, I kind of find the places that I like the sounds of, and I say, okay, I need to use that chord. See, I'm just making this up here on the spot, so I've never used this tuning before in my life. I used one similar to this. But the sound I liked was dun, 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 so I want to play. That's a sound that I could not get with any kind of close proximity with a guitar tuned in standard tuning. So my creative process involves, first and foremost, coming up with a new tuning at a park that I'm specifically at. And in fact, I even label that tuning. That's my Homestead National Monument tuning. That's my Rocky Mountain National Park tuning, or whatever. I call it the RMNP tuning. But anyway, again, this is just for my own organization. It's not something new to the world of guitar players. But by tuning strings to new notes, you suddenly have a whole new spectrum of sounds. A lot of great singer-songwriters over the years have used that, alternate tunings, besides Joni Mitchell. But John Prine is another one that comes to mind. Bob Dylan to some degree. But there are a lot of possibilities on a guitar that haven't necessarily been explored as much as others. And again, saying that is with a lot of exceptions. There are some amazing fingerstyle guitar players, which is the style of music I play, that use alternate tunings. But so that's a standard tuning song that came from Leo Kaki. But so when I say there's not a lot of players that use that, that's in the terms of singer-songwriters. Those chords, those standard chords, are the ones that people use. But like I say, I like to try to, for my own sake, expand the possibilities. It's like getting more colors, if you're a painter, to choose from. Because within the standard position of a guitar, you're just limited to the degree that the guitar is played. But yeah, that's kind of one of the focus I do things when I go into a new project. You asked about what project I'm working on. Now I'm working on an old one to put things together into new arrangements. But hopefully this summer coming up, I'm going to be able to spend at least a week in one location, if not a formal artist in residency, I'll just make my own residency. It might be the Grand Canyon, I'm not sure, but I'll just sit and be able to come up with some new music, and that will be my first step. What tuning do I hear here? And it will ideally capture the mood of that place, the tuning itself, and then of course the music has to be created within that tuning too. I'm sort of fascinated by the fact that 60 years ago, when the Beatles first started, Bob Dylan was first starting, that's when the guitar really became very popular in popular music. And again, we're talking popular music, blues music, rock music, not classical. Classical is a whole different world. Jazz really is a different world too. Their instrumentation, while there's amazing, great jazz players, Bill Frisell is one of my favorites, and he uses an acoustic a lot. But anyway, to answer your question, I think the guitar over 60 years is, sometimes I think, well, it's sort of run out of its possibilities, because, as I said a few minutes ago, these chords, tell me you haven't heard those three chords in 1,000 million songs. And, when are going to people get tired of that sound? I don't know. I refer, when I say when are people going to get tired, it's a popular world. There's great music that never gets heard or never gets purchased, but the world revolves around what is popular, and streaming platforms now, and of course in the past, and CDs and vinyl albums. But I do think sometimes the guitar is sort of, I don't know what new instrument will come along, if it's keyboard again, or if it's what, I don't know. Hip-hop music is all about the beat. There's very little guitar other than to add an effect within the rhythm. And really, for the last 30 years, hip-hop music has been very popular. So that's what I mean by something new will eventually come along and maybe replace the guitar in terms of the #1 instrument people go to for songwriting and for listening. But then, of course, with the exception of the tunings I was talking about, there's, I think, a lot of world to explore with different tunings. They make now a 7-string guitar, which adds another note, lower and sometimes higher than the 6 that you have. That gives you a whole nother range of possibilities. There's a thing called a baritone guitar, which actually sounds like a guitar, only an interval lower, what they call a 4th lower. So, I don't know, there's a lot of ways guitars are manipulated, both the way they're built and also the way they're tuned and played, that can give you variety. But I do think sometimes that the popularity of the guitar is at some point going to fade away. Yeah, that's true, and especially with an acoustic guitar, which of course has been around the longest of the history of guitar. You can take this into anywhere you go. Sit on a rock by a lake and play guitar, or sit at a campfire and sing along. And it's a very social instrument, the guitar. You're right, you can carry it, you can walk with it, you can stand with it when you perform. But it's also very transferable. You can't take a piano to the campfire, So yeah, that's probably the social aspect of playing guitar is maybe one of the reasons it's so popular, and always has been. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when Nebraska was being settled, this was one of their main entertainment. They took this in the covered wagons and sing songs at the end of the day, traveling across the state or settling on a homestead. So yeah, it's a very historically very important instrument, very important. This one is this one's not so old. It's a recent addition. It's kind of my go-to workhorse. This one over here is 1967. The one next to it, or actually, the bass guitar over there was made in 1964. The lifespan can go for 100 years. A friend of mine is a collector. He goes out to estate sales and garage sales, and and he found a 1942 Gibson acoustic guitar for a real good deal just few weeks ago. If they're kept well, and most importantly, if they were built well in the first place, they can go for a long, long time. Electric guitars the same way. Electric guitars started in the 1950s, but they are very, very long-term instruments. And in fact, if you have one from the 1950s, you also have a nice retirement account, because most 1950s, 60s guitars sell for a lot of money because they were built so well and because they are so in demand. The good ones, again, there's some that weren't so good even back then. An old guitar doesn't necessarily mean a very great guitar, but there are so many wonderful guitar builders in the world, both mass-produced guitars that are built well and you know, independent single luthiers that spend 3 months on one guitar. A whole assortment of woods have been used. Maple is probably the most common, and even more importantly than what kind of wood, for an acoustic guitar you want one that's got what they call a solid top, which many guitars are made now. It used to be that even 10 or 15 years ago that you had to pay a lot more money for a solid top guitar, which just means that the top, which is the most important for sound, the quality of the sound is determined by the top of the guitar because of the echo and sound inside the box. The top is what projects the sound the best. What the wood is for that, or whether it's a solid top or the opposite, which is a laminate top, which is just like plywood. That was the way that manufacturers would cut costs, and still do to some degree, as they put a laminate top on, which is very cheap to build, but it does not sound good. So you want to get a guitar with solid top, maple, like I say, rose, all kinds of different oaks have been used, all kinds of different, and you know, regions too. They'll say this is from a certain part of the world. The wood that they get is very, very selective. And, you know, people will swear by this kind of wood over this kind of wood. I've never been too interested in finding out what the wood was. I just sit down and play a guitar. I visit Chicago often, and there's an amazing music store there called the Chicago Music Exchange. And they have a room about the size of my house that's all acoustic guitars. One room in this store. And, you know, I can go there and play vintage guitars and new guitars, and every one is going to sound a little different. It's not just the wood they use, but the way they design the insides, the way they design the body style, all kinds of things will affect the sound. Acoustics and electrics, they're really built pretty well. Like I say, if you have a good guitar, you don't have to do a whole lot of special things. The most important thing is, in my winter in Nebraska, is use a humidifier. I actually have an actual table humidifier that I use in the winter. Right now it's 60 degrees here in Lincoln, so I don't have it on, but humidifiers keep the wood moist during the dry air of the winter. This guitar, just last winter we had a really bad winter, and I don't know if you can see this, but there's a crack right here. From here to here, there's a crack in the wood, from here to here. And last winter we were in a terrible spell of about 2 weeks of under 0-degree temperatures, or at least a week of it. And I heard a crack because I let this thing, these have sponges on them, and the sponge you have to keep moist with distilled water and put it in here for, it lasts 2 or 3 days before you have to re-moisten the sponge to keep the inside of the body humidified. Well, I forgot to keep the sponge wet, and I heard a crack, and the body just broke. It just breaks because the wood is so thin and fragile that it cracked the wood, which is really a sad thing. It was a sad day, let's put it that way. Now, I had it repaired. It still sounds fine. You know, I can play it. When it's in tune, it sounds better. It sounds fine and can be played. It sounds just as good as it did before it cracked, but it cracked. So caring for the guitar in the winter is the hardest thing to do. As long as you don't forget, you're fine. But you know, a simple cleaning rag with very simple, not a harsh detergent or anything like that. Now and then you have to get the neck adjusted, which sometimes the necks go out of alignment and they warp and they're harder to play, or they'll buzz the notes accidentally, or so sometimes you have to get a repairman to align the necks. But that's kind of like changing oil in a car. It's just one of those things you got to do. It's not a problem with the guitar. So yeah, it's easy to take care of guitars, and unless you're like a big rock star and all you want to do is smash your guitar, then you got problems. Don't use a power saw. Don't chop a lot of vegetables. No, I do worry about that. I haven't done anything special to them, but when I am using them for some sort of purpose like that where they could get hurt, you know, I try to be careful. I have a friend who's plays in a band with me, has for a long time, and he was a head of a restaurant for many years, and he was chopping vegetables and food a lot. And there was times when he didn't ever have to not, he never had to stop playing guitar because he cut himself. But there were times he had cuts on his fingertips. You know, the most dangerous part of the tip of the fingers, because that's where you're playing. I can strum a guitar with different ways with my right hand, but if the left hand doesn't work right, then you're in problems. You're having problems. You know, I don't do anything special to them, but other than, like I say, take care of them and be careful not to use them in ways I don't want to get hurt with. Oh, what a great story his is. Yeah, I played in a gypsy jazz is a style of music he created. I played in a gypsy jazz band here in my hometown a few years ago. It was such a glorious time because I had known of him, but I hadn't really discovered his music very much until then. I still listen to him all the time. Well, he was a I don't want to call him a freak of nature. He was a freak of humanity. He was an amazing player. He still is emulated all over the United States and all over the world for that matter. He was from France, but yeah, he was an amazingly gifted gypsy guitar player in the 1920s, and when he was 18, I think it was as a teenager. So he's playing these amazingly difficult and quick runs on the guitar, speed of amazing nature, but also beautiful pieces. And he lived in a tent, I believe, and he was a gypsy, so they moved from location to location. And I believe the story is his mother had candles in the tent, and one night it caught on fire, and he was scarred so badly that these two fingers of his left hand were paralyzed in this position. He couldn't move them anymore. See, when you play, you got to use all your fingers, which is what he was doing. But he burned his fingers so badly that they were, I think they did some surgical repairs, but they couldn't do anything other than keep them in that position. He still had the use of these two fingers. He had to relearn how to play guitar. And all of his fame and beautiful music came later. So he had learned to relearned to play the guitar with just these two fingers essentially, and became, like I say, almost 100 years later, he became legendary. And if you had to name the 10 most influential guitar players of any style in the history of music, he would easily be on the top 10. It's amazing. It's an unbelievable feat to see that he did that and to hear what he's done with it. As I know, there's only one really good video of him playing. It was actually, he was part of a movie. He was asked to be like the musicians in this movie scene. It's on YouTube, I know. I can't think of the movie, But it's really the only time you can see him doing this. And he plays chords with these fingers, but he's moving these fingers. So he's sort of using these. He's learned to use these two fingers to play parts of notes. But what a guitar player has to do is keep the fingers up and down, and he can't do that anymore. So the only two he could do that with were these two. So yeah, it's an extraordinary thing to see, and I wish there had been more videos. Of course, in this day and age, there'd be too many videos of him playing, but back then there's just one or two that I know of. And that's a story, a legendary story in the history of guitar for any kind of music, or just for life. If you want to be inspired, if you worry about your barriers in front of you are too much, just go read a Django Reinhardt biography, and then you'll feel better. Well, they can visit my website, which is www.davidboye.com. And I also have a teaching website, which is davidboyeguitarstudio.com. I try to keep my playing and my teaching separate. I do teach online too. All around the country I have students that I do with virtual lessons. You can reach me there. I'm on Spotify and YouTube and all those places. And hopefully this summer, if you're in the western part of the United States, I'll be coming in your neighborhood. You can reach me on Facebook and become a Facebook fan. This is the era of social media. So many of those places are easy ways to discover me.
you.